Welcome to Back in Crime, a podcast presented by Texas Crime Travelers. I'm Stewart Fillmore, retired FBI agent.
And I'm Todd Hiles, retired Secret Service agent. In this podcast, we cover cases we worked and some we wish we had.
As lifelong street agents, we were where the rubber met the road.
While the big guys were doing press conferences, we were interviewing the criminals.
And because of that, we can take you inside these cases
and under the crime scene tape.
This is Back in Crime.
We start today's episode with a debate topic.
The debate topic. Awesome. I love debate.
Exactly. So, was this person a legendary lawman, or was he the original podcaster?
Oh, okay. Wow, interesting.
Now, I know he's not the original podcaster because podcasting did not really begin until the early 2000s.
Right.
But surely this person would have been one of the very first social influencers or a social media personality at the time.
Okay.
Because just for the record, this person did create content and produce media that was in the format of episodes.
Okay.
And he had over 250,000 people signed up for his content.
Yeah.
And again, this was happening in the 1940s.
The 1940s. Okay. So we're talking social media of the day in the 1940s. Legendary lawman.
Right.
Okay.
But again, before we go too deep in this debate topic, let us start from the very beginning. Okay. Here we go.
Yeah, all right. Bring it on.
On December 20th, 1926.
Yes.
The director of the FBI is J. Edgar Hoover.
Okay.
And he receives a letter from a U.S. congressman from the 6th District of South Carolina. And in this letter, the congressman says that he knows a very bright young lawyer, and the congressman, in fact, knows the lawyer's family.
Okay.
And he asked the director, would you consider this young man for a position as an FBI agent?
Okay.
Now, I can only assume hours after Hoover or Director Hoover gets this letter, he sends a letter to the FBI office in Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay.
And he instructs them to conduct this very complete and thorough investigation into the applicant's character, the applicant's reputation, his ability and qualifications for a position as an agent in the FBI.
Okay.
And again, so now it's January 11th, 1927. Director Hoover sends another letter to the Atlanta field office, and he says, hey, where is my report that I asked for days ago?
Yeah.
I
had a deadline for you guys. Where's my stuff?
Exactly. On January 13th of 1927, the Atlanta office sends the director a letter back.
Yeah. Okay.
And they say, hey, quote, your request came in during the Christmas holidays when so many agents were taking leave.
Yeah.
And it was not possible to give this immediate attention, unquote. But basically, they're telling the director, we're on it.
Yeah.
But, to me, it's kind of weird right now that the director has his thumb on this, right?
Yeah.
It's really weird. And again, reading these memos and you're hearing this, it's just, that's not the way it was, of course, when we applied.
No, not by the time we were there. But, I will add this, Todd. My grandfather was an FBI agent, and years ago I got his personnel file. And he was in the FBI from 1941 to 1962. And, there's a lot of letters and stuff, correspondence from Hoover, just on mainly administrative issues, like especially when my grandfather first came in.
Right.
Exactly what you're talking about, where it's letters to the field office wanting to know what the status of this is. And I was struck by how much of the small stuff that Hoover controlled and had his thumb on back in those days.
Right. Surely this applicant, to us, it just seems a little odd that he's got his finger on it. But so now, in the middle of January, Atlanta completes the investigation.
Yeah.
And the applicant goes and he takes his medical and his physical exam with his own doctor.
Mm-hmm.
And By January 26th, Hoover sends a letter to the congressman, and he advises them that, hey, the applicant has been appointed as a special agent in the FBI.
Yeah.
Now, again, I threw out several dates there, but it really calculates to about 36 days from when the congressman sends that letter
Yeah.
to when the applicant is hired.
Yeah. You know, when I got into the FBI, I applied in May and I got in August. So,
well, that was quick.
yeah, that's pretty quick.
And even today, and probably at your time, the technology we had with computers and fax and internet.
Well,
and
part of the thing was I had never really, you know, I was still living in the same house I'd grown up in. So a background investigation was not that difficult. In other words, a lot of leads didn't have to be sent out to verify, you know, that I'd lived so and so place and all that.
Right. And I guess I was told of the story regarding my background when I was an applicant with the Secret Service. I was told that, you know, my background was going to be done kind of quickly.
Yeah.
And it would be over like by August. But then I found out that in August, it was reassigned and given a new completion date, which was by the end of the year.
Okay. Yeah.
And so now there's this story that I was told that on December 31st, New Year's Eve, around 7 p.m., there's an agent, and he is in a neighborhood that I used to live in. And he's knocking on doors, and he's finishing up that background part of my investigation, or my background. And he makes the comment to an old neighbor of mine that, hey, you know, it's New Year's Eve night, but I have until midnight tonight to get this done. And he's like, I still got a few more hours. I've got to get this completed.
Yeah.
So I don't think at that time the director of the Secret Service had his thumb on me as an applicant.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But,
no.
Yeah.
No.
So, but again, within 36 days, this guy's hired. And at the end of January, the congressman again writes to Director Hoover, and he states, quote, I want to assure you that I appreciate your kindness in this more than I can tell you.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to state that I think you have secured a valuable man in the department and one which I expect to hear more from.
Interesting.
Unquote.
Okay.
So, you know, this guy, and now we know who he is. I'm going to give you his name.
Yeah.
It's Melvin Purvis.
Melvin Purvis. Yeah.
And Melvin Purvis is hired as a special agent, and his starting salary was, take a guess.
Let's see. I want to say my grandfather's starting pay in 1941 was like $3,000 a year. So I'm gonna go out in 1927 and say 1,200, something like that.
2,700.
2,700. Okay.
But he gets an extra $4 a day if he's traveling for work.
Yes.
And when they hire him, they assign him to the Atlanta field office.
Mm-hmm.
And he shows up for his first day of work on February 4th, 1927.
So at this time, they really didn't have the training that you know, would later become, you know, at Quantico and through the FBI Academy.
Yeah, in fact, when he gets to Atlanta, the special agent in charge there, that's the person that actually swears him in.
Yeah, yeah.
And I guess at that time, would they have just issued him a gun and a badge?
Well, you know, in those days now, you know, they didn't carry guns. They, you know, at least that they weren't authorized to. Now,
Okay.
I think they did anyway. You know, guys carried their own guns, but they weren't issued guns, you know, officially at that time.
Do you know when that officially came out that they?
I don't know the exact time. It was, you know, we're talking, this is 1927, and, you know, there had already been an agent killed, I believe, in 1925. And it might have been sometime after that. It was certainly, they were authorized to carry guns by the time, you know, you get into the gangster era, so to speak. But yeah, I'm drawing a blank actually right now on when exactly they were authorized.
And I know you mentioned that the agent that was killed, and I believe in 1925, isn't his revolver that they issued him, isn't that on display at the Chicago field office?
I think so. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So anyways, you know, he shows up. Melvin Purvis shows up in Atlanta. The special agent in charge swears him in, but immediately transfers him to the Dallas field office.
Yeah.
Uh,
Oh, no, really? I never
yeah.
knew that. Okay.
And so 2 days later, he shows up at the Dallas field office, but he fills out a preference sheet that says he'd rather be assigned to Washington, D.C. or New York City.
Yeah.
Um, and he ends up staying in Dallas just a few short months because in May of 1927, per instructions of Director Hoover, he's transferred to the New York City field office.
Yeah. And transfers between offices in those days were very common. I mean, you could be transferred just at a whim of Hoover, within 6 months of, being at one assignment, you could be on your way to another one.
Yeah. Well, that's why it was crazy that he gets to Atlanta and they swear him in and they say, okay, now you're assigned to Dallas.
Yeah.
And he gets over there. And again, I've seen his personnel file that the FBI has on Melvin Purvis, and there are many memos in there that indicate that he worked at several field offices throughout the United States on investigations.
Yeah.
And in fact, he's highly rated by a lot of these supervisors in these other offices.
Yeah.
Then what I found what was kind of strange is that in February of 1928, he gets written up for arriving late for work. And according to the memo written by him, he states that when he arrived to work that morning, his watch showed the time of 8:58 a.m. But according to the special agent in charge, watch showed that it was 9:02. And so he's 4 minutes late.
Okay.
So,
and he gets written up for that.
Yeah. So according to the special agent in charge that was there, he was 2 minutes late, and he needed to submit a leave slip for an hour.
Wow. Okay.
But
I'm not shocked about that. I saw kind of the same things in my grandfather's file, where things that I would really consider kind of petty, were seriously written up.
Yeah, there was a lot going through his file, a lot of getting back to the firearms, saying, hey, you did not qualify with a certain weapon this year or this past year.
Yeah.
Please go qualify and get your scores in to headquarters.
Yeah.
They wanted their scores.
Yeah.
But, eventually he rises through the ranks. He has these brief assignments where he's in charge of smaller offices. But in 1932, Director Hoover places him in charge of the Chicago field office.
Okay.
And now he is, the SAC Purvis.
Right. And for those out there that don't know what SAC is, that's Special Agent in Charge.
Right. And I think in the Secret Service, we call them...
You call them SACs, right?
SAICs, Special Agent in Charge.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
That's how they abbreviate them in our agency. In October of 1933, United Airlines Flight 23 crashes.
Yes.
And this crash will be marked as the first proven act of air sabotage in commercial aviation.
Yeah, and we've talked about that one before.
Right. And the FBI leads the investigation, and the case agent in that is Purvis.
Yeah.
To this day, the case is unsolved, and strangely, it was classified for 80 years. And if you haven't already listened to our episode, it's Case 12, the Trip 23 Mystery Box. Make sure you listen to that because we discussed that plane crash.
Yeah, it's a really interesting case.
Right. It
really is.
It's a good case.
And again, I don't think a lot of people know about it, you know.
And again, Purvis was in charge of that. And again, around this time in U.S. history, like we've discussed before, the gangsters.
Yeah.
They're moving from bank robbery and holdups to kidnapping.
Yes.
And the Chicago field office is in charge of the Bremer kidnapping.
Well, where a lot of this crime wave, this gangster time, a lot of it was in the Midwest, and Chicago was kind of the center of where all this was going on.
And that's where the Bremer kidnapping happened, right?
The Bremer kidnapping, I believe, was up in Minneapolis, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah.
And then, but also going on during this time is the World's Fair is going on in Chicago.
It is, yes.
And that's a big deal.
Yeah, sure.
For Chicago.
Sure.
Because around this time, there's another memo that Director Hoover sends to the Chicago field office, and he's giving them an attaboy for they did so well on the Bremer kidnapping, and that that they sort of protected the city during this Chicago World's Fair.
Now, as I'm kind of thinking about this, Todd, I think Brimmer was in Brimmer was either in Minneapolis or maybe even Milwaukee. Could be wrong about that, but I think they actually brought him back into Chicago. It was the Barker gang that kidnapped him.
Okay.
And they held him in a house in Chicago.
All right, and so, that's probably why Purvis was in
Yeah,
charge. Of
exactly.
That kidnapping.
Yeah.
But again, we talk about that's a big case.
Sure.
Not only is
that was
the
a big deal at
plane,
the time.
That's a big deal.
Yeah.
And again, because of all this, Hoover sends this attaboy and says, "You guys are doing a great job."
Yes.
But then in March of 1934, he sends a letter to the Chicago field office, and he scolds them because they're not doing enough to capture John Dillinger.
Dillinger, yeah.
He says, basically in this memo, Director Hoover says, "You guys don't have to wait for instructions from me." He says at this time, Dillinger had escaped from the jail at Crown Point, Indiana.
Right.
And he drove a stolen car across state lines, and he abandoned it in Chicago.
That's right.
And he basically tells the Chicago field office, get out on the streets and capture Dillinger.
Right. Yeah, he's stressing also, go talk to your informants, develop new informants. Don't wait around for me to tell you what to do on individual, things to do.
Right. And again, that's in March. Very next month, April. In fact, on April 22nd, 1934, Purvis receives a phone call that informs him that Dillinger and some other gangsters, they're at a lodge up in Wisconsin.
Yep.
And Purvis and some of these agents from Chicago, they fly up to Wisconsin, and there's some agents from St. Paul that come over there. They fly to Wisconsin. They meet with the person who called Purvis, and this person tells them, hey, Dillinger is about to leave this lodge any minute.
Yep. This is Little Bohemia.
Right.
Yep.
So sometime after midnight, with very little preparation, it's in total darkness out there.
Yep.
The FBI plan to raid the Little Bohemia Lodge.
That's right.
And capture John Dillinger. And when they get there, a vehicle's leaving.
It just goes to crap.
Exactly. And there's a shootout.
Yes.
And an innocent civilian is killed. Actually, Babyface Nelson.
Well, the entire Dillinger gang at that time was at the lodge at Little Bohemia. They had them surrounded. Really, no place to go from where they were. But somehow the FBI managed to kill a civilian, and the entire Dillinger gang got away.
Right.
Yeah.
But in the shootout though, doesn't Babyface Nelson kills an FBI agent?
Correct.
And then from this. This fiasco right there.
Yeah.
There is this tremendous fallout, right? And there is a ton of criticism of not only the FBI, but really a lot of criticism of Purvis.
It's amazing that J. Edgar Hoover kept his job, and it's amazing too that he didn't fire Purvis. That Hoover didn't fire Purvis. Right. So let me add just a quick kind of little personal story on this. A couple of years ago, I was, I had a little guest appearance on Expedition Unknown. It was just, and the episode,
that's right.
Yeah, the episode was about Dillinger, and we actually filmed at Little Bohemia. It's a lodge, restaurant that is up in far northern Wisconsin. Really a pretty place. It really is. It sits on a lake. It's changed very little since the time Dillinger was there. And when you so when you go into the lodge, there's a bar / restaurant there, and we had finished filming for the day, and I was by myself, and I walked out of the door from where the bar is,
right,
and in front of me would have been the woods where the FBI would have been located. I'm walking out of the same door that these civilians were walking out of, that the FBI mistook for, the Dillinger gang.
Dillinger gang, right.
And they thought the Dillinger gang was getting away. And so they opened fire on these civilians. It turned out to be civilians. So anyway, I'm by myself. I'm walking out. It's late at night. I'm walking out of the exact same door that those civilians walked out of. And when I walk outside, the same trees that the FBI were in are still there, the woods they were in, and I had the weirdest sensation, and it only lasted for just maybe a second or two, but it was almost like that I'd walked back in time, and that
Wow.
I was at that moment, that I could see the whole thing happening,
How it unfolded.
right there,
Wow.
and it was honestly the experience was so bizarre or weird to me that like I kind of just shook myself out of it. But yeah, for just a brief second, it was like I had time traveled, because so it has changed so little there, and you just have you have the layout of exactly what happened. And it's just right there in
That's
front
crazy.
of you.
When you're like inside the bar or even around the door frame, were there still bullet holes?
Well, not so much that you can see now. That they do have one part of it where they preserve the bullet holes, in a window, that has these several bullet holes in it. They put plastic over it so that that obviously, so mainly so cold air can't get in.
Right.
It gets kind of cold up there. And then on the wall where those bullet holes would have shot, those are still there
Oh,
too.
that's
Yeah.
neat. That's neat. That's crazy story. Um, and again, so going back to this after this, you know, fiasco up there, there's newspaper articles that are printed that Purvis should be fired.
Oh man, big time. Oh, it was a disaster.
Right.
It really was.
But Director Hoover, he actually defends Purvis by saying Purvis was not in charge of Little Bohemia,
Yeah.
but it was the agent in charge of the St. Paul office.
Well, and again, let me go back to because the Little Bohemia shootout was a disaster. There's just no other way to say it. But when you really look at what happened, the Purvis had only been notified that day. I mean, this was all in one day,
Right.
And so I can't tell you because I made the drive from Chicago up to where Little Bohemia is when we filmed this episode, and I'm telling you, by modern roads, it's a long way.
Right.
Now they flew up there. I know the Bureau flew up there, and then they got in cars from some of the locals and drove up to Little Bohemia,
Right.
and I drove up that exact same road they were on. And even today, with a modern car, it was still very dark and very, because it was at night when I drove up there, and it was very remote, and it
Right.
still is. So these guys have got this tip that Dillinger is at this resort, at this lodge, and they make plan.
They scramble.
They scramble.
They scramble
Very
to
good
get up
word.
there.
So they scramble up there, and they're driving up this road. There's only one way to get to it, and they drive up this road. And they, Little Bohemia, the lodge itself is off the main road, so you have to go down another kind of little dirt road to get to it. Normally what you would do if you think that your fugitive is in a house or a location, the thing you want to do is get people behind there before you try to contact or try to apprehend the fugitive, right? They didn't even have time to do that. When they made their way up this little road off the main road toward the lodge, they see these people getting into a car,
Right.
and they had a radio going, and so that's why these people didn't hear them. They called out to them, FBI, stop, and they didn't stop. Well, the only intelligence they've got at this point is that, and it's from the owner of the lodge,
Right.
is who the tipster is all they know is Dillinger's there, and supposedly he's leaving soon.
Yeah.
So they just made a really bad decision that that's Dillinger, and they just opened fire, and it ends up that's where the civilian was killed. And and so then the gang hears the shots, and then they get away in the woods that are
Out the back.
at the back. Yeah.
But clearly, Director Hoover, he's upset that his agency failed.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a huge failure.
And not only that they failed, but that an FBI agent got killed.
Yep.
And this innocent bystander was killed.
Yep.
And shortly after that, the Chicago field office, they start a surveillance on Babyface Nelson's wife. She's in Chicago, and they start surveillance on her.
Yeah.
In May of 1934, Director Hoover sends a memo to the Chicago field office asking for a full and detailed report of how Babyface Nelson was able to visit his wife while the FBI had the wife under surveillance.
Yeah. Well, it's the same thing. John Dillinger was able to visit and have a 3-day family reunion at the Dillinger farm in Mooresville, Indiana, while the FBI had the place completely under surveillance.
Right.
So,
and again, you can read this memo and you realize, Hoover is angered.
oh man,
he is getting upset. So now, a couple months later, it's July 21st, 1934, and Agent Purvis meets with Anna Sage.
Yeah.
And she advises him that on the very next day, she and a friend are going to attend a movie in Chicago with John Dillinger.
Well, she tells Purvis that this man that's going by the name of Lawrence is living in one of her apartments and with and has a girlfriend that works for Anna Sage. Well, that tells you that she's probably a prostitute. And Anna Sage was an immigrant from Romania. She was here illegally. She was an illegal alien. And, she was under threat of deportation, and she wanted to get that handled. So she traded what she knew about Dillinger. But there's actually, I think we've discussed this too on other things regarding Dillinger, and maybe was there a Dillinger imposter and that kind of thing, and were there police protecting Dillinger? Well, Anna Sage was a long-time friend, and that's a generous term, more like probably some kind of a lover situation, but with an East Chicago, Indiana police officer named Martin Zarkovich. And Zarkovich, I think it's pretty well established now, had given Dillinger some protection, and safe house down there, and so now you have the girlfriend of this cop that had protected Dillinger at one point. Now she's turning in Dillinger, and there is a reward for this. And Zarkovich and Anna Sage end up getting a reward out of this. But yes, so that's the background on Anna Sage, who talks with Purvis.
Right. And so the next day, on July 22nd, 1934, after the movie ends, Agent Purvis, he's waiting outside the theater, and he sees Dillinger exit, and he gives the signal to his agents to get him.
Yeah, the signal was lighting a cigar.
Right. And it's reported, and it's actually mentioned in articles later written by Purvis that he said, "Stick 'em up, Johnny. We've got you surrounded."
Yeah.
But, the report goes on to say that, Dillinger kind of tried to draw his gun out, pull his gun out.
Yeah.
But he never fires it, but that he is shot and killed by the agents.
Yes.
Now, over the next few days and weeks, there are hundreds and hundreds of fan mail and letters and telephone calls and telegrams that pour into the FBI congratulating Agent Purvis.
Right. Yep. Dillinger was a big deal. I mean, he was huge. He was a media sensation himself.
Right.
And the public was fascinated with Dillinger. And so now you have this FBI agent who actually at the time, they were actually not called the FBI, but it's the same organization. Right. They had a different name at the time. But yes, so, and I think at that point is when the FBI kind of started getting the mystique of the G-Man and, that kind of thing. Right. And so this is the start of something that becomes part of
this is huge.
Part of the culture.
Yeah. This is the spark that, because this is around the world. Yes. Agent Purvis is getting letters and commendations.
Right.
Because he's the man that got John Dillinger.
That's right.
And then, on July 23rd, 1934, Director Hoover sends a memo to Purvis. And this is such a great memo that it really sets the tone, I think. And you have a copy of that memo.
Yeah. No, let me just read it because it's pretty interesting. It's addressed to Mr. M.H. Purvis, Division of Investigation in Chicago, Illinois. Dear Melvin, I wanted to write and repeat to you my expressions of pleasure and commendation which I tried to convey to you last night. The shooting and killing of John Dillinger by the agents of your office under your admirable direction and planning are but another indication of your ability and capacity as a leader and an executive. I am particularly pleased because it again confirms the faith and confidence which I have always had in you. While the expressions of the public are most laudatory, you and I both know how fickle such may be, but I did want you to know that my appreciation of the success with which your efforts have met in this case is lasting and makes me most proud of you. The gratification with which the Attorney General received the news when I spoke to him just before he took the train for the West would have indeed pleased you if you could have heard his expressions. He and Mr. Stanley, the assistant to the Attorney General, have both been so patient and helpful in their attitude of confidence and support that I was glad that the division, that's what the FBI was called at the time, that the division could, quote, get Dillinger and, quote, get him itself. This would not have been accomplished had it not been for your unlimited and never-ending persistence, effective planning, and intelligence. And I did want you to know how much I appreciate it. With expressions of my best regards, I am sincerely yours, J. Edgar Hoover.
Man, what an incredible memo to have in your personal file.
Yeah, I mean, that's,
and that again, it's outstanding that he's got that. But, months later, cases go on, more cases come up.
Sure.
And in October of 1934, Agent Purvis, he's actually working a kidnapping case, and so he's in Cincinnati, Ohio, when an associate of Pretty Boy Floyd is arrested in Wellsville, Ohio.
Yeah, Adam Richetti.
And Purvis is instructed to go get him in federal custody.
Yeah.
And then, pursue any leads about where Pretty Boy Floyd is.
Right.
Because it was known that these two were together at the time.
That's right.
That the accomplice is
That's
arrested.
Right.
So, and we've talked about this before, it's the role of the duty agent. With every telephone call or walk-in that comes in the office while you're the duty agent, it can be a career-breaking case, or it can just be some crazy person coming in to report nonsense.
Yep.
You never know.
You never know what's coming in the door.
And so
exactly right.
Here in October of 34, Purvis is just because he's the person closest to where this guy's arrested that Purvis gets sent there.
Yeah.
I mean, it is so lucky that he gets this. And so, Purvis goes over there. They interview this associate. They get him into federal custody, and he gives up where Pretty Boy Floyd is.
Well, Pretty Boy Floyd had basically been wandering in the woods since they split up.
Right, but he was able to direct him out there.
Yeah.
And so Agent Purvis and some other law enforcement, they go out there near a farmhouse.
Yeah.
And they have a shootout with Pretty Boy Floyd, and Pretty Boy Floyd is killed.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you're there when Dillinger's killed.
Yeah.
In July, and
he
now
got two of the biggest names, in that gangster era and that crime spree.
Yeah. And it's just months later in October.
Yeah.
You get Pretty Boy Floyd.
Yeah.
Now Agent Purvis, he really is a superstar.
Well, one of the things too, what I find interesting about the memo, and how congratulatory that Hoover was to Purvis, is in the months leading up to before they captured Dillinger, Hoover had brought in another, his title was inspector. His name was Sam Cowley. And Cowley basically outranked Hoover. And outranked Purvis.
Right.
And Cowley was effectively running the Dillinger investigation. So Purvis was technically the one in charge. He's the one that the public or the media, focused on. But effectively, Hoover had kind of demoted Purvis leading up to the capture of Dillinger. Probably because you said, he'd sent out some screamers wanting to know why this has not happened.
Right.
And then the Little Bohemia thing is when, that's when Cowley is in, and, Cowley was effectively running this, whereas Purvis was more the face of it, I guess.
Right.
So interesting stuff.
like I said, Purvis is now a superstar because the
Yes.
people believe
Exactly.
that he got Dillinger and now he got Pretty Boy Floyd.
Yep.
And director Hoover is actually being overshadowed by Purvis.
Yes.
Because Purvis is becoming famous. He's a G-man, and now he
Yeah, the
is
papers are
famous.
really playing him up
Right.
as the man who got Dillinger.
Right.
Yeah.
And then the very next month, November 1934, the FBI are involved in a shootout with Babyface Nelson.
Yes, and that's where Sam Cowley is in that shootout.
Right. But Purvis is at this shootout, right?
Well, he responds to it. What happened was Cowley and another agent, Ed Hollis, were. They were actively looking for Nelson, and they actually passed each other on a road. It's just north of Chicago, northwest of Chicago, and I believe Barrington, and they passed each other on the road. And then Cowley and Hollis began pursuing him. It ended up in a shootout, and Cowley and Hollis were both killed at the scene. They mortally wounded Nelson, who was found dead a couple days later, I think. His body had been dumped, basically, by his wife, of all people.
Right. But like you said, 2 more FBI agents get killed now in this shootout. But again,
so Hoover, I'm sorry, Purvis would have no doubt responded
would have
and
been
at that scene.
Right.
Yes. Oh, without a doubt.
And so now, again, you can see how this lore of this legendary lawman is starting to grow now.
Absolutely.
Because not only Dillinger, not Pretty Boy Floyd,
Babyface Nelson.
Now you got Babyface Nelson. And so he is on his way to being the superstar. Purvis. His name is everywhere now.
Yep.
But now I'm not sure why. But right after this time, more inspectors from FBI headquarters, they're sent to the Chicago field office to do this review of the office, and they just come back in December of 34, and it's a bad review of the Chicago field office. In fact, Purvis is removed from being the SAC, or the SAC of Chicago, by Hoover. And there's just many people believe that Hoover is just going after Purvis for these minor things that are going on in the office.
Yeah.
And he's forcing Purvis probably to resign from the FBI because Purvis has just become so famous. He's the face of the FBI.
Yep.
And so
he committed the ultimate sin and got more popular than Hoover.
Right. And on July 10th, 1935, finally Purvis resigns from the FBI.
Yeah.
And his resignation, I mean, this is headlines in newspapers across the United States.
Yep.
I mean, this is huge news. This is the most famous FBI agent to date.
Yep.
And he just quit the FBI.
Yep.
We know that after he resigns, Purvis goes to California, and there's some reports that he tries to star in some TV shows, or they try to make some movies about, these G-men and things like that.
Yeah.
We know that he passes the state bar out there, and he actually becomes a lawyer in California.
Yeah.
But really around this time, he just rocket ships to fame. Everybody knows his name.
There's movies made about him and everything.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
He makes endorsements on like everyday products like safety razors. There's a poll that's conducted around this time, and that it's the most admired person in the United States is President Roosevelt, and number 2 is Melvin Purvis.
That didn't sit well with Hoover.
No, and you bring that up because I think I think this is the first time that you're going to hear this. And when I came across this, I thought it was so great. So in August of 1936, Director Hoover receives a letter, and I'm going to read this letter to you.
Okay.
It says, "Dear Mr. Hoover, I am 14 years and I am an autograph collector. I received your autograph, and I'm one of the happiest kids on my block since I received your autograph. I tried to get Melvin Purvis's autograph, but I couldn't. I would appreciate it very much if you could find time to send me if you have one." Now,
Oh
can you
boy.
imagine Hoover getting that?
I can't imagine how that went over.
So, but what's kind of strange is that Hoover responds back
Yeah.
to the young man with a letter, and this is what Hoover says back. Quote: He says, "Dear Peter, I received your letter on August 7th, 1936, in which you requested the autograph of Mr. Melvin Purvis. Please be advised that Mr. Purvis is no longer connected to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, and it is impossible for me to furnish you his autograph." I mean, Hoover had to be fuming
Oh
when he
man,
got that.
people are asking me for Melvin's autograph.
That is just crazy. And again, the stardom of Melvin is still taking off. I mean, he's the spokesperson for Dodge cars, and they use him in
Yeah.
advertisement of their cars.
Yeah.
And it's around this time that Purvis creates this Junior G-Man Club.
Mm-hmm.
And as part of this program, young kids can join his Junior G-Man Club, and they receive, badges, they receive
Sure.
manuals.
And at the time, that would have been a big deal.
Yeah, and secret agent props that you get.
Yeah.
He becomes the face of a breakfast cereal.
Yeah.
And inside his breakfast cereal, they promote his detective club. And a lot of times there's prizes inside these cereal boxes. And there's over 260,000 boys and girls that join his G-Man Club.
Sure. And Hoover's tracking every second of this.
Oh, yes. And, and there's reporting that this club probably, even rivals the Boy Scouts at the time, because it's a big deal. There's movies, there's cartoon strips, there's books written about Junior G-Men, so, we've got to say that Melvin Purvis really becomes a social influencer at the time. In 1936, he publishes a memoir of his times in the FBI. And of course, the FBI, they review the book.
Yeah.
And they make official comments, in a memo to Director Hoover. And they basically say, hey, the book is very favorable to the FBI, but that Purvis never mentions Director Hoover by name in the book. And sort of like
a lot of bad feelings there.
Oh, a ton.
A lot of ill will.
Right. And sort of, I guess maybe in a podcast format, he starts to host a Sunday night weekly radio broadcast.
Yeah.
And he talks about police stories. I think this program was entitled American Agent. And he talks about what goes on in the daily life of being an FBI agent. He also hosts and he produced these other True Adventures of Junior G-Men radio program. And this program features true crime stories from the files of the FBI.
Well, Hoover also had probably his own competing Junior G-Man stuff going on.
Right. And I think there are some memos going back and forth where at one point he's got to stop. He tells Purvis that Purvis can't say that he's a G-Man anymore.
Yeah.
He can't use that, keep saying I'm a G-Man, because you're not. You resigned from the FBI. You've lost that title. So again, a lot of bad feelings between these two. But Purvis's programs, they're aimed at young adults.
Sure.
And again, if Purvis was alive today, I bet he would be a podcaster, and he'd be selling a lot of merchandise.
Yes.
He would be knocking it out of the park.
Yep. Well, it's like a modern example, with maybe someone like, say, Dan Bongino, who was a Secret Service agent that decided to get out, not under the same circumstances as Melvin Purvis, but he got out and then kind of built a career, talking about giving his insights into how what being a Secret Service agent does and that life.
Right.
And so it's a similar thing.
He became famous, became a superstar afterwards.
I think he's kind of evolved from that now. He's more of a a political commentator, but I think it started off as just his insight into the life of a Secret Service agent.
Right. And people wanted to hear that.
Yeah.
People wanted to hear that. And yeah, he became popular just like, Purvis doing this back in the,
So a similar thing.
yeah, yeah, exactly. In April of 1937, it's reported that the most idolized man in America is Purvis. And now he is engaged to Janice Jarrett.
Okay.
And Janice Jarrett was born in Jacksonville, Texas.
No kidding. Okay, now that's close to us for our listeners out there.
Just a few miles
where Todd and I are.
A few miles down the road.
Yeah.
And at the time, she is the most photographed person in the world. She appears in ads for numerous items, and she is the official Lucky Strike cigarette model.
No kidding.
Her ads are seen all around the world. And they're set to be married in San Antonio. So Purvis is in town for the wedding, of course, but 3 days before the wedding, Purvis and Janice, they have this argument in a hotel lobby in San Antonio.
Okay.
Out there in public, they have some type of this verbal argument, and the wedding is called off without any type of public explanation.
Yeah.
Years later, Purvis will end up living in Florence, South Carolina. During World War II, he serves as an army in the colonel. He serves as colonel in the army. He actually ends up buying a radio station in Florence.
Okay.
Where he's from. So really from resigning from the FBI in 1935, for really the rest of his life, the FBI keeps a file on Purvis.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this file is full of memos and notes and newspaper articles. The FBI really keeps up to everything that Purvis is doing. Whenever he gives a speech, the FBI agents are there. They hear the speech and they report back to Hoover to say what Purvis said in his speeches.
Well, you have to understand, that going back to, the killing of John Dillinger, I've said this before. I believe that the FBI brand was built based on that, on Dillinger's killing.
Exactly.
And Hoover used that through. I think Hoover was very talented in a lot of ways, and one of them was he was good with public relations and building that brand, that image, of the G-Man. And I think that he just kind of saw Melvin as someone kind of stealing his limelight. And so I can imagine that Hoover was wanted to stay alert and aware of what was going on at all times with Purvis, so that he could probably figure out, how can I exploit that to make, my own image or the image of the FBI even better or whatever.
Right.
So yeah, he would have been keenly interested in whatever's going on with Purvis.
And we've talked about this before, but it's so unique that Hoover is the director of the FBI back in the 20s.
Yeah.
And he's the director all the way to early 1970s?
So he was the director from 1924 to 1972. That's 48 years.
And he served through, so many different administrations, presidential administrations.
Yep.
There is a lot of reporting that, throughout, even the 40s and the 50s, where they felt that Congress was trying to reach out to Purvis to see if he would become the new director.
Mm-hmm.
And Hoover was aware of this.
Oh yeah,
he was aware that that Purvis was still this popular.
Yep.
Even years after leaving the FBI.
Yeah. That's another area we could get into at some point, but a big part, and this is no secret, and it's not favorable, and there's nothing complimentary about it. Hoover, a large part of the way he stayed in office so long is he had dirt on so many people.
Right. He
was not afraid to use it to either get what he wanted administratively from the FBI or to keep his job.
Right. So on February 29th, 1960, Purvis is 56 years old, and he's at his home in Florence, South Carolina, when he dies from a gunshot wound to the head.
Yeah.
According to the Washington Post article, shortly before noon, Purvis's wife, who's outside in their garden, she hears the single gunshot. She runs into the house, and she finds him upstairs in a hallway.
Right.
Kind of crazy is that the FBI investigates his death, and they conclude that it was a suicide.
Yeah.
A later investigation will suggest that maybe Purvis accidentally shot himself while he was cleaning the gun, or there's this idea that there was this tracer bullet inside the gun that maybe he was trying to extract it. But this new investigation said that it's probably it was an accident. It wasn't a suicide.
Mm-hmm.
But let's flash back to October 1933 for just a second.
Okay.
And again, Hoover is the agent in charge of FBI in Chicago.
Yep.
And
no, Purvis is.
Yeah. Purvis is the agent in charge. And so in Chicago, there's this gangster named Gus Winkler.
Gus Winkler. Okay.
And Gus Winkler comes to visit Purvis at the FBI office.
Yep.
And Winkler, he's given information to Purvis about another gangster. Now, unfortunately, Winkler is seen by someone leaving the FBI office.
Okay.
A few days later, a newspaper reports that Winkler is gunned down by 3 men, each shooting a shotgun. The newspaper article indicates his watch is made of diamonds and he has several hundreds of dollars on him when he's killed, but no gun.
Okay.
He's unarmed when he's killed. At the time, Winkler's wife will bury him in a $10,000 casket.
Nice. Nice.
Yeah. I couldn't imagine what 10. I mean,
that's probably close to $1 million now.
Yeah, that's 3 times probably what Purvis was making as the agent in charge back then. And that's just a casket to bury him. There's also reports that during Winkler's funeral, his apartment in Chicago is broken into and his fur coats are stolen.
Oh, man.
Now, I mentioned that he did not have a gun when he was gunned down.
Yeah.
Because legend has it that when he visited Purvis at the FBI office in Chicago, the agents searched him and they took the gun away.
Took his gun.
They took his gun. Further legend has it that when Purvis resigned from the FBI, agents from the Chicago field office gave him Winkler's gun as a gift.
As a gift, okay.
And in 1960, when they find Purvis's body in the hallway, it's Gus Winkler's gun that is lying next to his
Interesting.
body.
So I've heard it before. In fact, the 1973 movie Dillinger, that really was kind of when I, my interest in this whole saga of gangsters and all that started. At the end of the movie, it says that Purvis committed suicide, but that he had done it with the gun that he had used to kill Dillinger with. Well, that's inaccurate in that Purvis didn't fire a shot.
Right, he did not fire a gun.
At that. It was 2 other agents that did it. So, Purvis was there. There's no question about that, but he did not kill Dillinger. He did not fire those shots. So, that was inaccurate. And then since then, there's some other, I guess, some controversies about whether it was a suicide or not. And honestly, I haven't looked that deep into it, to give you a concrete opinion on it.
Right.
But,
and you mentioned that, he did not fire the shot with Dillinger.
Yeah.
And I think at the shootout in Little Bohemia, when they pull up there, I think that Purvis writes a memo at that time that the machine gun that he had malfunctioned and that he never got a shot off at that shootout either.
I've read that entire file, and there's numerous reports, about what happened and who did what. And I honestly, I want to say that's exactly right, that Purvis, really didn't fire a shot at Little Bohemia either.
Right.
Yeah.
And again, at the farmhouse then with Pretty Boy Floyd, I don't think Purvis is actually shoots either at that time.
Yeah, so in the movie Public Enemies, just a few years ago with Johnny Depp, that there's the scene where Pretty Boy Floyd is killed. You see the Melvin Purvis, who's played by Christian Bale. They're in an orchard, and Christian Bale, has a scoped rifle, I believe, and he shoots Pretty Boy Floyd, who's running away.
Right.
In that one, I don't think that's true either.
Right.
So it's interesting that Purvis is at all these famous things when he really didn't fire a shot.
Right. But again, it goes back to my debate topic then. Was he the greatest lawman, or was he really just a major social influencer for the time?
I tend to lean more toward just a good social influencer who I think no doubt, had some, some talent as far as, maybe being a good administrator, not necessarily an investigator. I'm not, aware really of cases that he worked directly.
Right.
Something that people need to kind of understand is, when you talk about special agents in charge and those guys, they were day to day, they don't do investigation. Right. So
they weren't where the rubber met the road.
That they like we were.
Right.
And that's something that we've always tried to kind of convey is that, the work, the day-to-day work is not done by the guys that you all hear about.
Right. But you see the guys on the news giving the press conferences.
Yes.
The big boys up there.
And Melvin Purvis would have been the press conference guy of the day. And no doubt he was out on the street, and he did coordinate the information from Anna Sage that led to the tip of Dillinger,
right?
That got Dillinger, and he was present there, but beyond that, I don't know. He clearly had some kind of talent. It was recognized at the time. But I think more than anything, probably, is that he just was in the right place at the right time.
Right,
is more than anything else, and then he capitalized on that.
Right, but I would say this, that his life is a great story.
It is very interesting,
and he could tell a great story.
Yes,
because he was there.
So let's add a little more intrigue to this. So you and I are on another podcast, called Digging Up Dillinger,
right?
And the main thrust of that is the belief or the thought, the possibility that it was an imposter that was killed at the Biograph Theater. That was not John Dillinger,
right?
There's quite a few things that are pretty tantalizing about that. That I think it's a possibility that's worth looking into,
right?
The
idea of digging up Dillinger's body.
Yeah.
And looking at to see
let's confirm that identity
that it really
with
is
modern, technology.
Right.
But that aside, in 1960, when Purvis committed suicide, it had only been a year earlier, a man had sent his photo into the Indianapolis Star newspaper claiming to be Dillinger. And there was there's some speculation that I haven't fully confirmed that Purvis found out that actually that had not been Dillinger that they had killed, and that really a lot of his fame, if you will, or what his whole persona had been built on, much like Hoover's, that
he was the man that got
Dillinger. Well, no, you didn't.
Right.
And so that might have been the cause for the suicide.
The driving force. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. But that's not confirmed. That's still in speculation.
Right. But I think at the end of the day, like I said, his whole life, his career, it really is a great story.
It is. It really is. And
it's a great story.
He was you can actually see this on YouTube. He was a guest star on an old TV show called What's My Line? Where it was the premise of the show was you would try to guess
who was lying.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And the participants were given certain information about the background of the people, and there's three people, and you had to guess which one they're talking about.
Right. Who really actually was Melvin
who really
Purvis.
Was.
Right.
Right. And
because the other two contestants claimed that they were Melvin Purvis.
That's right.
And the I guess the people playing the game can ask questions.
Yes. And so you can actually, that's on YouTube. You can see that.
Yeah, you can see it. And so it is unique to see that is Melvin Purvis, the real guy.
Yeah.
And then now
And what's interesting is he kind of, he's from South Carolina, and he had kind of that very cultured kind of Southern accent,
right.
with the, kind of a slow drawl, but you could tell a very educated man.
Right. Right. But again, I got to say, a great story.
Yes.
His whole career, a great story. So, as always, thank you so much for listening. And as a listener, hit that subscribe and follow button.
Absolutely, yeah. And keep the questions and comments coming, too. We really like the feedback. Sometimes you guys see things and that we miss. So we want to know that, and we want your input. This has been the Back in Crime podcast presented by Texas Crime Travelers Todd Hiles and Stewart Fillmore. We are the executive producers. Grace Hiles is the producer and director. Theme music composed by Eddie Bandas. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and our YouTube channel at Texas Crime Travelers.